Hello, everyone. I'm really pleased to welcome you at the International Conference Sustainable Heating and Cooling, a key issue in tackling global warming. Federico Bernardelli speaking here, coordinator of country image and positioning at the International Affairs Office of the Chilean Ministry of Energy. I am broadcasting live from a very cloudy Santiago this morning and to all over the world. And I'm really proud to say that today's audience covers more than 30 countries in the 5 continents. I invite you all to leave a really short message in the YouTube chat stating from where you are connected. And also you can use the same chat for sending comments and of course asking questions to our distinguished panelists. Before to start, it's important to remind you that in the landing page of the event, you will have the possibility to choose the language you would like to listen the conference to. The realization of this conference has been possible thanks to the joint efforts of this ministry and the International Energy Agency, and it follows last year's event on energy efficiency. We acknowledge the valuable support of the Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit, GIZ, and the energy partnership between Chile and Germany. Allow me now, please, to switch into Spanish. Nuevamente bienvenidos a todos y a todas a esta conferencia internacional, Calor y Frío Sostenible.
Again, welcome to the Cooling and Heating International Conference. Before we go to the agenda, I want to welcome the Ministry of Energy in Chile and the GIZ and the International Energy Agency. We will be looking at the sustainable energy from different perspectives, from geography and different global perspectives from the different energy agency, and we'll see different success cases internationally and locally, and then we'll see a local perspective on public policies from our ministry. Then we'll finish with a regional perspective on how we can see our agenda, and we'll have different panels. And within these panels, you'll have the opportunity to make different questions using the chats that we have in both channels. Of course, we'll be trying to answer as the more questions we can, but of course we apologize if we cannot answer them all. I also want to say that in the landing page you can choose the language that you can listen to the event at. I want to welcome Mr. Juan Carlos Jovet so that he can give the welcome words. Be Minister of Chile. So the word and the floor is yours, by Minister. Thank you very much. Good morning or good evening or good night, depending on when you're watching this.
It is a great honor for us to be hosting this event that, as Federico said, we co-organized with the International Energy Agency. I want to really thank Mary Warlick and Brian Motherway and the rest of the team of the agency who are joining us today. I want to thank also Fatih Birol. I think we're going to hear from him in a couple of minutes. The work that the agency is doing all over the world to push the energy transition is essential for us as a country. Your analysis, your vision, your support has been very important for the development of this strategy, but for many other things that we are doing. So thank you so much for your continuous effort and for co-organizing this event. I'm going to switch now back to Spanish to give you some brief opening remarks. Buenos días a todos nuevamente. Gracias por acompañarnos.
Again, good morning to everyone. Thank you for being here from all over the world. As I already mentioned, this was co-organized with the International Energy Agency, and we want to share best practices and experiences and projections for a more sustainable use of cooling and heating in the region and in our country. I want to thank everyone from the ministry working on this regard and also to the International Energy Agency. So cooling and heating is quite relevant for our goals, even if we don't speak enough of it. But to be aware of that, the International Energy Agency estimated last year that 77% of its use goes to the commercial, household, and industry sectors. And it's mainly through fossil fuels. Biomass, it's around 12%, and 10% is only on modern renewable sources. So that's why it's so important to talk about this sector and to get through a net zero emissions. Regarding Chile, 35% of our emissions go from this sector. So that's why in June this year, we launched our first cooling and heating strategy that is complementing some other of our instruments that are leading us to a net zero goal, which are very ambitious for by 2050. This will get us to have 80% of sustainable energy used for all our cooling and heating, and 70% for households. And also that we will be reducing 65% all our GHG emissions that are related to cooling and heating. This has also to do a lot with all our tools, from the renewables that are already replacing our coal-based centrals, and the renewable energies that we want to go up to 40%, and everything that has to do with renewables, because this will be our base, around 35% of our total for energy. And also our electromobility, that will be the base for our transportation. And all these goes with our hydrogen strategy as well. I also want to thank everyone who made this event possible, and also to thank the International Energy Agency, Irena, Bloomberg, the International Development Bank, IWASL, Abatible, INCH Consulting, and everyone who made this event possible. I want us to have a very useful journey so that we can actually reduce our emissions in this sector, so that we can really get the transformation we need. Thank you very much, and let us kick off this event. Thank you very much, Minister. I think those were all the organizers, and all of them, thank you very much as well. Now I will change to English so I can introduce
a real friend of this ministry. Our institutions have a solid and fruitful relation, which results in a long-term collaboration on several topics, such as some clean energy ministerial programs or other relevant areas like the flexibility of power system, energy efficiency, and, for instance, heating and cooling. Ms. Mary Warlick, a Deputy Executive Director of the International Energy Agency since April 2021, and former United States Ambassador, together with the Executive Director, Dr. Fatih Birol, is leading the transformation of the agency into a global hub for clean energy technologies and energy efficiency. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and Humanities from Valparaiso University, Valparaiso from Indiana, not the Chilean one, and a master's degree in Law and Diplomacy from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Ms. Warlick, many thanks for being here today, and of course, the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you very much, Federico, and thank you also very much, Minister Joubert, for taking the time to be with us today. Let me extend warm greetings from Paris to all of you and to our distinguished panelists and participants. Ladies and gentlemen, it really is a huge honor for me to open this international conference on heating and cooling together with Minister Joubert. We greatly appreciate our relationship with Chile and our bilateral cooperation with Chile on its way to becoming a full member of the International Energy Agency. We were pleased and honored to be asked by Minister Joubert to support the development of your energy efficiency law last year, and glad that we were able to come together again after last year's energy efficiency conference. I was also very pleased to see the publication of the Chilean heating and cooling strategy in July, as it clearly shows the strength of Chile's ambition and commitment to meet the challenge of decarbonizing the heating and cooling sector. Heating and cooling accounts for almost half of global energy consumption, and mostly from fossil fuels. And our analysis shows that globally, almost 80% of new heating equipment sales are fossil fuel-based equipment and less efficient conventional electric heating technologies. So we must make sure that every building and every appliance is as efficient as possible, as this will lower consumer bills, reduce emissions, and enhance affordability. As you know, the IEA is working with governments around the world to accelerate action toward net zero targets just as fast as possible. We're truly at a crucial moment as we approach COP26 in Glasgow, where we must see ambition turn into concrete action. Tomorrow, the IEA will publish our 2021 World Energy Outlook, which will show the kinds of urgent action that are required and show how the world can reap the benefits of a new, lower carbon global energy economy. Chile is showing how to take action. Minister, I commend your commitment to the SEED initiative's product efficiency call to action, which the IEA is pleased to be co-leading with the UK as COP26 president. And this action will help to ensure that heating and cooling appliances become much more efficient in the coming decade, lower costs for consumers, improving energy security and resilience, and reducing emissions. Chile is truly a leader in setting ambitious targets for carbon neutrality. But as the new heating and cooling strategy shows, you are also taking the concrete actions that will make the change happen. So Minister Joubert, I once again highly appreciate your strong support and the work that Chile is doing to ensure a sustainable energy future. And I look forward to the upcoming opportunities to deepen our cooperation on clean energy transitions in Chile. Thank you very much once again.
Many thanks, Ms. Warlick, for your intervention and very interesting words. We are really glad to keep strengthening the solid relations between the Ministry of Energy and the International Energy Agency. And we are confident that together with the international community, we will succeed in reaching the common goal of carbon neutrality by 2050 or even earlier, we hope. So I would like to now to move forward, unless Minister Joubert would like to say something once again. You are muted, Minister.
Sorry, I was muted. I would just thank again Mary for joining us, for the support. The leadership of the agency is essential for us, and it's an honor to co-organize this event and to have your support throughout our carbon neutrality and energy transition efforts. So thank you so much again for joining us.
Okay, thank you, Minister. I would like now to introduce today's first keynote speaker, Dr. Brian Mathaway. He's the head of the Energy Efficiency Division at the International Energy Agency, and he oversees a range of analytical and outreach programs supporting energy efficiency globally. He will give us a speech on the international trends in efficient low-carbon heating and cooling systems. Brian, it's really nice to see you again 1 year later, so the floor is all yours.
Federico, thank you very much, Minister Jobe. Buenos dias to all our friends and colleagues in Chile and in the region. And again, adding my warm greetings, as Ambassador Warlick did, from all of us here at the IEA in Paris. It is indeed a great pleasure to be here. A year passes very quickly since the last time we convened in this configuration to talk about energy efficiency, and this year with a focus on heating and cooling. And again, I want to express my appreciation for the really wonderful collaboration we have between the IEA and all of our friends in Chile. And again, it's a real pleasure and privilege to be working with you, especially with the leadership you're showing nationally, regionally, and globally in terms of the great ambition you have, but also the great action on the ground. And of course, it's action on the ground that is really our focus now. In the last year, we have seen a lot of very positive signals in terms of raised ambition, stronger targets, stronger commitments to decarbonisation, but our data doesn't show that translating into the right kind of progress yet. In fact, after a dip in energy demand and related emissions in 2020, we're seeing a rebound, quite a strong rebound as economies recover, so that emissions are actually rising, not falling. So a huge amount of action is required if we are to get on the path of global ambition for net zero as soon as possible, and certainly by net zero by 2050. And you'll be aware that the IEA published a very significant roadmap looking at how the world's energy system can get to net zero by 2050. There is more than one roadmap to 2050, but this one illustrates the kinds of actions and ambition and strong measures that are required urgently if we are to deliver on the global ambition that more countries are signing up to, and we expect more to do so soon. There are literally hundreds of significant milestones on a journey between now and 2050 if we are to meet our net zero targets, and they relate to all sectors. They relate to technology, they relate to policy, they relate to energy supply and energy demand. If I focus, of course, on energy demand, we see that both heating and cooling are crucial. As the Minister said, it's a huge demand sector for energy use, and it's mostly reliant today on fossil fuels. So talking first about cooling, air conditioning is growing rapidly in many markets, and you can see here in this chart why, because there are certain parts of the world where effectively everybody owns an air conditioner. There are many parts of the world, including the hottest parts of the world, where that hasn't been possible up to now because people simply couldn't afford it. That is changing, and air conditioning and other ways of keeping cool and comfortable bring good things to people's lives, and it's entirely understandable that people want to access these kind of comforts and well-being benefits when they can afford it. At the same time, if we see all countries following the same trajectory towards much higher rates of air conditioner ownership, it has huge, huge implications for our global energy systems and for our emissions, of course. And therefore, of course, energy efficiency becomes central. How do we allow people to access in an affordable way the comfort and benefits that cooling, air conditioning, other technologies bring them, but in a way that doesn't put our climate and energy targets out of reach? And energy efficiency is central, because what's really interesting about air conditioning is there are much more efficient devices available in every market. As you can see here, if the blue bars represent the typical available technologies in any given region or market, what's being sold is typically among the least efficient. And this is obviously very frustrating to us all, to be aware that better technologies are available, but they're typically not being sold and bought by people, whether that's because they're perceived as more expensive, whether they're less well marketed, whether they're less well available. Many factors vary, but at least it shows the opportunity here that we don't need major technological innovation, we don't need major market change, we just need the right kind of policies to push people towards the better, more efficient options that we know are already available to them. And of course, air conditioners sit in the context of buildings, which are vital both to our cooling and our heating challenges. We know that in countries that use instruments such as building codes, that they really work. We know that homes and offices can be made to be much more efficient than without the right kind of policies. Here in Europe, if somebody builds a home today, it's more than twice as efficient as the average home in Europe because of the advancements in technology and because of policy pushing people towards more efficient, better ways of building, better types of appliances, better types of construction materials. So we know that policy really does work, and we know that what we need to be doing in all regions is extending the reach of these policies, but also extending their ambition. Even in countries that have appliance standards, that have building codes, we know that ambition can be ramped up over time to push the markets towards more efficient, more clean options that ultimately benefit consumers. It's important to stress that energy efficiency lowers people's energy bills, makes their lives more comfortable, makes comfort and convenience more affordable, as well, of course, as it reducing global emissions. So if we look between now and 2050 on our roadmap to net zero, we see major changes in both the building envelope and the equipment we put in the buildings. From a point of almost zero today, we need in the next decade to be seeing huge growth in the deployment of zero carbon ready buildings. So that's very efficient buildings ready to make use of renewable sources as they come online. And by 2050, nearly all buildings need to be in that category. Similarly, in terms of heating equipment, we need to see fast and strong moves away from the kind of heating we're using now, particularly fossil fuel based, towards the technologies of the future, such as district heating, heat pumps, electrification, hydrogen, and other key technologies. We know the pathway for these technologies. We know the pathway for these sectors. What matters now is policy, engagement, and participation. I want to mention two key areas that I really think are important drivers as we move on this journey towards net zero. First of all, digitalization and digital innovation is opening up a whole new vista of how we think about energy efficiency, how we think about clean energy, particularly in the electricity sector, where we can think about dynamic ways of making use of the clean resources that all countries are bringing online in flexible and nimble ways to make sure we're making maximum use of clean energy resources when they're available, and we're minimizing peak loads at other times when we rely on more expensive and more carbon intense fuels. Digital can really change how we think about energy efficiency into a much more dynamic, fast-changing concept where we think about flexibility, we think about demand-side participation, and we think about efficiency of the whole system, not just the end use of energy. I think it's going to be a really exciting time to think about how digital technologies can open up new options for policymakers, manufacturers, and consumers. The second area I want to highlight is something that I know is very close to Minister Jobé's heart, because he is one of the esteemed members of our Global Commission on People-Centered Clean Energy Transitions. Our Executive Director convened this Global Commission earlier this year as a recognition that all clean energy policies really need to focus on people. We are on a journey to make people-centered transition so that people can benefit from clean energy, it can be affordable, it can bring comfort, and also that we can protect people from the worst ravages of climate change. But at the same time, without a people-centered inclusive focus, our clean energy transitions simply will not succeed if we don't bring people with us in terms of social acceptance, political buy-in, and of course, behavior change and consumer response that we need to see from people. So in that light, we've brought together a really excellent group of people, including Minister Jobé, from every geography, energy and climate ministers, plus stakeholders from labor, youth, civil society, from large countries, from small countries, from energy producers, from energy importers, thinking about best practice around the world onto how to make clean energy transitions more inclusive and more people-centered. The Commission has been hard at work, and in just 2 weeks' time, they will release their recommendations at an online event to which I would warmly invite you all, where the Commission will share its wisdom across a number of themes as to how to make people-centered transitions really successful. They will be talking about decent job creation, how to create the maximum number of jobs, how to protect people who may lose their jobs or need to reskill or redeploy. They'll be looking at issues around social and economic development, including energy access and affordability. They will have recommendations for governments and stakeholders around the world on how to ensure equality, social inclusion, and fairness are all at the heart of clean energy transitions. And of course, they will recognize the role of people at the center of this in terms of their political participation, their engagement in decision-making, and their engagement as consumers and energy users. The recommendations will be sharp and action-oriented, and of course, they're being made just in advance of COP26 in Glasgow, where the contribution of the Global Commission will come into the debate as major decisions and major talks take place in Glasgow. So I invite you all to follow us as we complete that process, and I thank Minister Joubert very much for being an active member of that commission. So Federico, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, Minister, thank you very much for your attention today. Thank you for allowing me to share some contextual words, and we really look forward to the rest of today's event. Thank you very much, Federico.
Many thanks, Brian, for your speech and for presenting such an engaging vision on heating and cooling. And as we did last year, if you allow me, I would like to capitalize your presence here today, asking you a couple of yes or no questions. And of course, if you wish, you can complement it with your thought with a short statement. So I think you agree on that, right?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, in your opinion, should the state be the main promoter of sustainable heating and cooling?
So everybody's involved, Federico, and we're all involved as citizens, as consumers, but certainly when you look at the parts of the world that have made the most progress on energy efficiency, policy is the key driver. Policy really matters in this space, and therefore we certainly encourage all governments to position themselves as leader. And I think Chile is an excellent example of what leadership can deliver in terms of the progress being made there. So my answer is yes.
Okay, so are regulations the most effective mechanism to move along with sustainable heating and cooling?
Historically, yes. To date, if you look at which countries and which policies have made the most progress, regulation has been the most effective, whether that's appliance regulation, building codes, standards and labels for the washing machines and televisions or cars, all of that kind of thing. In the future, I think there might be new dimensions driven by digitalization, but I think we should never forget regulation well applied, well designed and well implemented really can work well.
Okay, and last question, Brian. Is technology the key element for a successful integration of heating and cooling in the energy matrix? And if not, which would it be?
So Federico, I think that let's look at two time horizons. In the next decade for heating and cooling, the technologies we need to deploy exist today. And we really need to major on energy efficiency and particularly in heating and cooling. We know the technologies exist. I gave the example of air conditioning. The better technologies exist already. It's about deployment. It's about getting them out into markets. As we go beyond this decade, yes, there will be a need for a lot of technological innovation. We'll need to see greater deployment of low carbon fuels, hydrogen and other technologies. So innovation remains absolutely important, but in the short term, there's plenty of technology available for us to make great use of right now.
Okay, so crystal clear, Brian, thanks a lot once again for being here with us today. And now I think we should move forward to our first panel, which is focused on international experiences with sustainable heating and cooling. It takes a look across the value chain to provide insights into how policies and strategies are advancing heating and cooling around the world. So what has worked, what hasn't, and now we can get to scale. There will be four very short presentations, followed by a moderated discussion. Of course, we invite all the audience, as already said, to send their question through the YouTube chat. We are pleased to have such distinguished panelists and a great moderator, Mr. Jack Miller, policy analyst at the International Energy Agency. Jack is an energy efficiency expert at the International Energy Agency, as already said, since June of 2021. Previously, he worked as senior energy advisor at the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology at the UK Parliament since 2017. He holds a Master of Science in Energy Policy for Sustainability at the University of Sussex, and also he has a degree in physics, both also at University of Sussex. Welcome, Jack. Please take the floor to introduce the panel and your panelists.
Thank you very much, Federico, and also to the Chilean Ministry of Energy for the chance to moderate this panel today. It's a real pleasure to be here. And good morning, of course, good afternoon and good evening to our audience at home, wherever you might be in the world. So our first panel today, as Federico has mentioned, is focused on international experiences of decarbonising heating and cooling. And before I begin and introduce the panelists, I just wanted to say a few words about the topic as a way of kind of framing our discussion over the next 60 minutes or so. So we've already heard some excellent talks today about the importance of the topic for the clean energy transition. And that's in part, of course, because heating and cooling touches every part of our lives. As individuals, we depend on the energy services that they provide, but also in every sector of our economies, right through from the high temperature heat that manufactures our building and consumer products, for example, through to the other end of the temperature scale, to the cold supply chains, for example, that keep our food fresh and our vaccines and other pharmaceuticals safe. And this scale and complexity, I think, is equally broad when it comes to the technologies that are involved as well. So you might think about the technologies that actually deliver the heating and cooling. So we've heard about the appliances, but you can also think about district heating and cooling networks, for example. But as Brian showed us, equally important are the technologies that deliver it more efficiently, whether that's our buildings and homes themselves, our appliances or our vehicles. And additionally, as Brian showed as well, we're seeing a new generation of digital technologies unlocking new frontiers in delivering energy services. So given this complexity, then I think the question is, how do we create the environment where investment can scale up as quickly as we need it to in order to keep us on track to in our net zero ambitions? And we know that there's no single solution to that as well, because it's such a big and complex question. But thankfully, we have 4 excellent speakers today who can help us get to the bottom of that question, hopefully. We'll begin with Dr. Jan Rozenau, who is Principal and European Programme Director at the Regulatory Assistance Project, and he'll talk us through some examples of decarbonisation in buildings. Then we'll move on to Patrick Crittenden, who is Director at the Sustainable Business Group, and he'll share some insights with us on how the challenge is being tackled in industry. Thirdly, we have Irena Bianco, a Programme Officer at the International Renewable Energy Agency, and he'll focus in particular on some of the policies that are needed for that transition. And then last but not least, of course, we have Emma Coker, a low carbon heat associate at Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and she'll discuss some of the investment and financing aspects of the transition. So each of our panelists then will speak for 7 or 8 minutes, and that will give us a good chunk of time at the end, a good half an hour or so for discussion and some questions from the audience as well. So please do add any questions, as Federico has mentioned, if you have any questions for the panelists, do add them just into the YouTube stream that you're watching, either in English or in Spanish. So to move on to the panel then, Dr. Jan Rozenau, our first speaker, is a Principal and Director of European Programmes at the Regulatory Assistance Project, as I mentioned. RAP is a global team of energy experts. Jan has several board appointments, including the European Council for an Energy Efficient Economy and the Coalition for Energy Savings. He's an honorary research associate at Oxford University's Environmental Change Institute and has been named one of the world's top 25 energy influencers. So Jan, I'm delighted to welcome you, and I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I hope you can all see the slides and you can hear me clearly and see me. I can see Jack nodding. Excellent.
That's right.
So it's really good to be here and speak to you about this topic. I think it's a really important area that has been neglected for far too long and in far too many countries. I've worked on heating decarbonization for about 15 years now. And only in the last few years has the conversation really picked up some speed. And that is really good to see, especially in the run up to COP26, starting in actually only 3 weeks' time in Glasgow. In the debate around climate change and transition, we talk a lot about renewables and the coal phase out. And of course, that's very important. But what is often forgotten is that, at least in Europe, I'm sure it's very similar in parts of Latin America as well, residential heating actually results in very high emissions. In Europe, it's more than all coal power plants put together, the emissions from residential heating alone. And the main reason for that really is that almost half of Europe's energy today is used for heating, most of that from fossil fuels, and most of that for heating buildings. In my presentation, I wanted to just pick out a number of interesting international examples from Europe to share with you that you might find inspiring, and I'm sure you will have some questions about. But before I start the presentation, I just wanted to share a personal story with you. This is my own house in Oxford. a humble terraced Victorian building, 141 years old. And you can see 3 different heating systems: a coal fireplace that was put in place when the building was constructed in 1880, a gas boiler that was there when we bought the house, and now a heat pump. We have already heard from Brian that heat pumps are going to play an important role. And we have gone through these different phases when we try to decarbonize our own heating system, and we reduced emissions by about 70%. So I'm not just talking to you as someone who is looking at this in a very abstract way as an analyst. I'm actually doing it in my own home, and I have experience with the difficulties around that, but also the benefits, of course. So now I wanted to just briefly point you to some of the trends in Europe and point to some of the good examples that we have. So this slide shows you carbon emissions data for residential heating from a recent study by the Heat Roadmap Europe project, which came out last year. I highly recommend reading it if you haven't seen it yet. On the left-hand side on the graphic, you see the total carbon emissions from residential heating and the fuels responsible for them. You can see that coal and heating oil has declined quite a bit over the last decades, but Europe now relies heavily on gas for heating. And of course, this is still carbon intensive, although less than coal and heating oil, but we're also dependent on importing gas from other countries. For example, Russia, and recent discussions around the gas price increase show how exposed we still are in Europe to such imports and price rises. So the data here shows that yes, there has been some progress across the European Union, but as an aggregate, we haven't done enough. Progress is too slow. It would take about 2100 to fully decarbonize heating at the same pace if we just continued. So we need to accelerate. And which countries are doing well? And that's where you need to look at the right-hand side of the graphic. You see different countries named here, all the 27 member states of the European Union plus the UK. And you can see which fuels are responsible for the emissions, but also the intensity of heating, the carbon intensity per unit of heat generated. And you can see above the bars, you can see a black dot, which is the emissions in 1990. And between the column and the dot, that's the improvement achieved for each of the countries. So you can work out that some countries have done a lot better than others. For example, Sweden, Austria, Finland, Denmark, and a few others have reduced emissions a lot faster than some countries that have done not quite so much. Poland, for example, but also the UK, where emissions haven't gone down as fast. So for my presentation for the last few minutes, I just wanted to pick out a few of those countries that have done well to bring down their emissions and just explain how they've done it. Before I do that, just one other indicator that is useful, I think, in this, and this is the density of heat pumps across Europe. This is data from the European Heat Pump Association. And you will see that the further north you go, typically you have more heat pumps, which seems counterintuitive, but that is the case. So Norway, Finland, and Sweden and Denmark are clearly leaders here. Norway has now pretty much a 50% plus penetration of heat pumps in the residential sector, which is quite remarkable. So both of those graphics enable you to find which countries have done more than others. And they tend to be the same countries that have done well on heat pumps that have decarbonized the fastest. So first country I wanted to talk about is Sweden. When you look at this graphic, you can see a number of things. Focus first on the black line here, that is fuel oil. And you can see that in the 1970s, at the height of the two energy crises, we had almost 80% heating oil being burned for heating buildings in Sweden. That has now come down pretty much zero over the last 50 years or so, and has been replaced by district heating, but also heat pumps, some electric heating, but also, of course, some biomass. I know that's an important fuel in Chile. A lot of biomass is being used in buildings for heat generation. So that's how Sweden has done that. And the question, of course, is which policies did they deploy? What regulations did they deploy? Brian already mentioned regulation is very important. There is good research on this. I can't go into all the detail, but this is a graphic that the UK Energy Research Centre developed. And they looked at how, using the example of heat pumps, the market growth has been achieved. I just wanted to point out three things here. First, a carbon tax was imposed in the early 90s. And secondly, there were some subsidies for heat pumps being made available to households. And thirdly, there's a governance framework around that provides high quality training, customer protection, information to the general population of what's available. And these three elements together have led to that quite remarkable uptake in heat pump installations, but also a cleaning up of the district heating network, which is the other very important technology in Sweden that has led to decarbonization. The second country I wanted to pick out is Denmark. Denmark actually has a very similar profile. Again, in this case, focus on the dotted line, the blue dotted line, that is heating oil. You can see most buildings were heated burning oil. That's come right down, is now approaching zero, being replaced again by district heating, heat pumps to a lesser extent, although that's growing in more recent years, you can't see on this graphic, and also some biomass. So very similar trajectory, slightly different policies, but essentially following the Swedish example of having a good policy mix. Just one point on Denmark. Quite recently, the Danish government announced that all electricity used in buildings for heating is now exempt pretty much from all of the taxes within the legal minimum limit that the European Commission stipulates. So that's what Denmark has done to give electrification of heating yet another boost. So those are two examples I just wanted to highlight of countries that have done a lot. There are many more, but we don't have time to go through all of them. I just wanted to pick two that I thought would be of interest. Finland, just to conclude, is on a remarkable trajectory to installing lots and lots of heat pumps, which you can see on this slide, starting at very low levels and now at record deployment levels. Again, carbon pricing, subsidies, and a good regulatory framework around that has delivered that. What are the learnings? And then I will conclude. So there has been some progress in Europe, but it's been pretty disappointing overall with some success stories. So we need to do more, but some countries have done a lot. Electrification, district heating, and energy efficiency are central pillars of this in the countries that have managed to bring emissions right down. There are different pathways, but usually they include some form of carbon pricing, some form of regulation, strong financial support, and a very robust governance framework. I stop here. I'm sure we have many more other interesting presentations, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jan. Some really interesting insights there. Thank you very much, particularly showing that the level of discrepancy, I think, that still remains across Europe is really interesting to see. And of course, nice to have a personal touch as well. Thank you very much for that, Jan. So I'd like to move on to our second panelist then, Dr. Patrick Crittenden. Patrick is the director of the Sustainable Business Group. He is an advisor, trainer, and facilitator, providing services to governments and businesses on strategies that accelerate efficiency, energy management, greenhouse gas reductions, and corporate sustainability. Patrick has provided expert input to energy programs in a range of countries over the past 20 years. So Patrick, welcome. It's great to have you here, and I'll give you the floor now. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Jack. And it's a great privilege to be part of this event. And as we collectively work together to explore the challenges, but also the vast opportunities associated with decarbonising our economies across the world. And of course, industry is an essential component of that and is living through, and we're seeing these real big changes around the energy transition that we're working through right now. So with just a few minutes to set the scene around this question of how industry can accelerate the transition from fossil fuel-based heating and cooling to the efficient use of renewable energy, I thought I might just draw upon an example and a case study of something that many might relate to. And that is, maybe we don't relate to the process of making beer, but many people will relate to the act of drinking beer. Beer is a good example to look at heating and cooling in industry because there are many parts of the process where there's heating various parts of the process up, there's cooling in other parts, then heating once again. So it involves multiple heating and cooling streams. So if we look at the process, the milling and mashing and then boiling as hops are added, whirlpool where there are separations of ingredients and then cooling once again. There's a fermentation process and the temperature rises again. We have the bottling, the use of hot water, and then we take that beer to pubs or to our homes, put it in a refrigerator and drink a nice cold beer. So there's multiple heating and cooling streams there. And from that comes multiple opportunities. Now, the first, of course, is around energy efficiency and looking at this process of beer brewing, but any industrial process, and really asking the question, how can we do more with less energy? And that may be pumps and motors, but is most effective when the whole process is looked at. We can utilize waste heat, particularly because there's heating and cooling. Where are the opportunities to gather that waste heat and use it as an input to the next process? There are many opportunities there. We can source renewable electricity, something that is becoming easier to do as there is more renewable electricity available. But some of the processes will still require gas. So we can look at producing biogas. So using the waste products from the beer production process through anaerobic digestion to create biogas and to use that as an input into the process. We can also look to source solar thermal hot water and steam directly. And the final point here as well, and I think one of the major trends happening in industry at the moment is really looking at the question, particularly around thermal heat, and looking for opportunities for electrification rather than using fossil fuel-based sources. And through that electrification, we can really draw upon the opportunities that renewable energy presents. Lots of technology options, but of course, change is driven by people. And that's why within the industrial sector, there's been a particular focus on putting in place energy management systems, systems that help an organization, help a business to adopt a structured process to value energy and the other benefits in a way that leads to systematic improvement. And key components of that are things like taking a data-driven approach, actual use assisted by digital technologies, and looking at, I'm sorry about the slides, seem to have changed a little bit there. But looking at sorry, I've lost control of the slide, so I'll just continue with my presentation. But looking at digital technologies and really understanding what's the ideal, what's the theoretical minimum energy that's required, and what's actually happening, and where are the opportunities to make some improvements there. As well as adopting that data-driven approach, it's important to be stakeholder-driven and to look at bringing together technical experts with experienced operators, with suppliers and managers, the final decision makers, so that these opportunities are not just done in a report with technical analysts, but there's an engagement process across the organisation overall. And a final perspective that's important to bring here is a business-driven approach. And a business-driven approach requires looking at the multiple benefits that this transition can bring in looking at opportunities and how they not only save energy or lead to decarbonisation through the use of renewable energy, but also how they deliver solutions to current business challenges. My last slide here, I'm not sure if you can see it, but I just wanted to briefly talk about structuring policy packages for industry. And really the first step is to understand the industry that you're looking to develop a policy package for, to understand their drivers, their challenges, their maturity around the management of energy. And then to consider what regulatory aspects are important. It might be things like minimum energy performance standards. What informational needs are there? Is there an opportunity to promote new technologies that they're not aware of, or to promote the great work through case studies of some business leaders in the area? Using information to build capacity is also essential, both within the organisation, the people who are driving the change, and in the energy services sector and wider consulting sector to bring in these new technologies and deliver results. And finally, incentives, thinking about both rewards and recognition, but also about financial incentives that can really help to drive change. Thank you, Jack. I look forward to the panel discussion.
Thanks very much, Patrick, and apologies for the technical issues there. But some really interesting insights there, and I think particularly important for me is the issue around data and information. I think none of this can happen without adequate access to information, both on a consumer level, but also on a business level, of course, and throughout the supply chain. Thank you. So moving on then, I'd like to present to you Irena Bianco, who is a program officer at the International Renewable Energy Agency, or IRENA. Emanuele has a wide area of interest and expertise across the whole spectrum of the energy system, including renewable energy system integration, power market design, and heating and cooling, as well as green hydrogen. So really looking forward to hearing your insights, Emanuele, and I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome everyone from Abu Dhabi. Now I'm going to share my screen to present some of the insights from a report that IRENA has prepared together with the IEA in 2021, titled Renewable Energy Policies for the Energy Transition, Heating and Cooling. When we published the first report in 2018, which didn't have a focus on heating and cooling, we called heating and cooling the Cinderella of policy making, energy policy making. But as Jan mentioned, heat is a large consumer of energy, 49% in 2018 of all the energy consumed, mostly fueled by fossil fuels, and a sizable part of the so-called traditional biomass. This means that if we are really true to our net zero commitments, this is an area where policymakers have an opportunity to focus on, since it's so large and so important and impacting our daily lives. But still, there are many barriers that we identified that are blocking the development of renewable energy in the heating and cooling sector. The first of which are the political and institutional barriers. Policymakers around the world are not giving enough long-term vision on the decarbonization of the heating and cooling. This means that investors do not have the drive to invest in a certain area. And actually the fact that Chile has a heating and cooling strategy means a lot. It means that it's among few countries that actually have a plan. At the same time, let's not forget that there is another important barrier, that is the high upfront cost. Renewable energy technologies similar to the ones in the power sector have a very high upfront cost, and people may not just afford them and prefer the traditional uses, being them biomass in some countries or natural gas. And other barriers, which are, for example, weak supply chains and the lack of awareness of the technology in both the consumers and the potential installers of the technology. But let's look at the bright side. There are also a lot of benefits in developing renewable energy, apart from the decarbonization of the heating and cooling sector, which is capital, but also reducing air pollution, strengthening energy security, reducing our consumption of gases that in this period of energy crunches appears to be quite relevant, achieving universal access for developing countries, and reducing energy poverty, which is a plague that affect all the world, and spurring job creation and local economic development. And when I talk about job creation. We just published a report about how many jobs are created by solar water heaters technology in particular, and we see in these figures that most of the jobs are localized. So creating a policy that supports new technology, being heat pumps or solar water heaters, is also job policies that will impact with create benefits for the country itself. However, and now I'm going to present some of the policies that are needed, but in particular some of the policy design that are needed. One in particular I already mentioned is the fact that we need a long-term vision. In the NDCs that we now have, most of them have some quantified renewable power targets, but only a few of them have quantified renewable energy targets in the heating, cooling, and in the transport sector. And this needs to change. Another factor is that we needed to divert the fossil fuel subsidies to the renewable energy. Hundreds of millions of dollars that are given to the fossil fuel sector could benefit the heating and cooling sector, among other sectors, for renewable energy. And here you see the values of this. It's pretty impressive still, the amount of subsidies, even if we don't account for the health impact and the climate change impact of these sources. Another point to be remembered for policymakers is priority setting. We have a lot of technologies, but they are not all the same. And instead, having some form of strategy, an idea on where to develop what would be actually beneficial and accelerate the transition. Nowadays, we see sometimes suggestion to use, for example, green hydrogen for heating buildings, but we can have the same results with heat pumps with higher efficiency. And biomass is available in large part of the world, but there are a few areas where it could actually be more beneficial. For example, like in the example before, in industry that already have bio waste. And it's important to have a strategy because these technologies have a very long lifespan. A building has hundreds of years of lifespan. A district heating and cooling networks can have a century-long life. So the decisions that are going to be made now will have an impact in the future for years and years. So since the time frame that we have to avoid the climate catastrophe, it means that the decisions that we are going to make now will have are very important and are going to have an impact in the life of the future generations too. So with this, I conclude, and I look forward for your questions and for the panel. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Emanuele. And a good point to conclude on then is of course the urgency of getting this right now. If you look at the lifetime of many of these heating systems that are being fitted today, we obviously know that delay will only end up costing more in the end. Thank you. So we'll go then to our final panelist, Emma Coker, a low carbon heat associate at Bloomberg NEF in the heating and cooling team. Emma has worked on decarbonisation pathways for heating and cooling in residential and commercial buildings. Prior to taking on this role, Emma spent 5 years working for the New Zealand government in a variety of roles, including as economic advisor to the Treasury and as senior economist for the Ministry of the Environment. So Emma, welcome. Really looking forward to your thoughts today, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jack. So hi, everybody, and thank you very much for having me at such an important discussion. As Jack said, my name is Emma Coker, and I work for Bloomberg NEF. So for those of you who are not familiar with us, we are the research arm of Bloomberg, and we focus primarily on the energy transition. So for us, that used to mean more the focus on power markets. So was it going to be wind? Was it going to be solar? Geothermal, for instance? But as you well know, when we look at the pie chart of energy use and the pie chart of emissions, of course, buildings and industry is incredibly large and significant chunk. So I actually sit within our buildings and industry division, and I focus primarily on low carbon heating and cooling. So here at BNEF, We've discussed this already. We think about it in terms of how can buildings decarbonize either through fuel switching or energy efficiency. So for fuel switching, we see three main pathways. Electrification, which we primarily see as heat pumps due to the efficiency, but of course it can include technologies such as direct electric. District heating, of course, district heating refers primarily to the grid, but we assume district heat networks are provided by low carbon sources such as large-scale heat pumps or waste heat, for instance. And then finally, green gas is a bit of an all-encompassing pathway. It can mean biomass, biomethane, and biogas, which we've heard a bit about already for the likes of Sweden, for instance. But it can also mean hydrogen. Hydrogen, of course, has seen a lot of hype recently. And so I will go into this. On the very far right-hand side, we consider energy efficiency a pathway, but it in and of itself won't be enough for us to get to net zero. So while it will be essential and play a significant role, getting the fuel switching right will be incredibly important for buildings. So in terms of investment, this not only depends on cost of the low carbon heating technologies themselves, but it also depends on the relative economics of the dominant fuels. So Dr. Jan showed us, the breakdown in Europe. So we care about how low carbon heating technologies are performing relative to natural gas or relative to heating oil, depending on the market you're in. So now I'm just going to run through a bit of the cost analysis we've done for each of the pathways. So first up, heat pumps is kind of the first and foremost pathway we talk about a lot. We heard from Brian from the IEA say that, of course, heat pumps are going to play a significant role. But what you can see, this is based on the lifetime cost of a heat pump. On the left-hand chart, what this is heat pumps relative to natural gas across a number of markets. If the bubble is grey, it means natural gas is in fact cheaper over the lifetime of the unit. If it is blue, it means heat pumps are. As you can see, unfortunately, in 2020, only France and Japan managed to have blue bubbles. If we do the same equation for heating oil on the right-hand side, what you can see is actually now a bunch more countries moved into the blue, which is much more promising. And that's, of course, because heating oil can, in fact, be more expensive to source and run your unit, as well as less efficient. Next up, we wanted to do this for residential hydrogen because, of course, as I said, it's got a lot of hype around it recently, and people are starting to discuss whether this is, in fact, a feasible pathway. So we did this for 2030, so please note this is a different timescale, and we chose our homes in the UK. And so what you can see on the left-hand side, this is lifetime cost. Heat pumps actually upfront can compete or be more competitive than an air source heat pump. However, what you can see on the right-hand side is because of the higher cost of operation, the levelized cost is actually overall more expensive. And so this kind of lends us to be slightly more bearish in terms of whether residential hydrogen will actually be a key pathway for net zero. Finally, district heating. This chart becomes a bit more complicated because, as I said, district heating primarily revolves around the grid itself. It doesn't, lend itself to what is actually fueling the district heating network. So we wanted to have a look at the levelized costs for a new build network in the UK that's serving apartments across a number of different fuel sources. So on the very left-hand side, we've got two fossil fuel-based networks, a combined heat and power plant run by natural gas, and a gas boiler fueled network. In the middle, we've got the low carbon only fueled network. So that's a heat pump either sourced with waste heat or ground source. And in the middle, we've got a hybrid network that uses a gas boiler on the kind of coldest days of the year. Now, I wanted to showcase this chart because, as you can see, despite low carbon not actually being as competitive as natural gas today, district heating can in fact be a cheaper option than individual heating technologies for apartments. So as you can see on the far right-hand side, gas boilers and air source heat pumps, especially electric boilers for apartments, are actually more expensive. So it may well be that cities want to choose district heat networks. They also have the benefit where you can effectively plug and play the sources. So depending on the temperature, of course, and the technologies within the home, most of the new build networks now, even if they are built for gas, can in fact transition over. Now, we just talked about policy before, and I want to reiterate this. Significant change won't happen without policy, and that's in part because of the economics I just showed. So again, we divide this up into three: upfront support that can either be for the heating unit itself or insulation subsidies, operational costs, which tend to work well when they're paired with another form of policy. And then finally, Dr. Young also mentioned the kind of bans and mandates and how important regulation has been, for example, for uptake in new builds where minimum energy performance standards start to kick in. And so just finally to finish up, it's not only the responsibility of government, although we did hear from the Minister that of course they have a role to play, but it can be that we can get some more innovation happening for business models. So on the far left-hand side, direct sales, this is the most common business model we see. A household will buy the heating unit and own it themselves. They will then be responsible for maintenance and operation, for instance. As we're starting to decarbonise, we're seeing more and more experimentation with different models. So what you can see on the right-hand side, leasing or rental models are kind of increasingly becoming part of a service offering that can then be paired with heat as a service. So we often talk about it as how we can Netflix the heat sector for low carbon. So effectively you take that decision away from the household and they just pay a monthly fee. And that can also lead to business models like in the far left, where you can do demand response and aggregation. Now that also plays into the heating sector playing well with, transport being electrified and sector coupling, for instance. So there's definitely wins to be had by all. But with that, I'll finish up because I'm excited for the discussion ahead. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Emma. And really, some really salient points there around business models, I think, at the end, I think. If we look at how we're meant to drive the investments and how we're meant to, how consumers are meant to overcome the cost barriers to installing and retrofitting their homes or installing new appliances, for example, then it looks like new business models are going to be really important in doing that. So thank you very much for that indeed. So that comes to the end of our speakers, and I would just, I would urge colleagues and those watching to add any questions to the YouTube streams. We've got a couple coming through. And I'd like to start with a couple that have come through around kind of energy access. So a lot of the presentations have focused on kind of European context or Australian context, for example. And we've talked a lot about, buying new heat pumps or getting green gas. But then, of course, it's very important to forget that, there is still a lot of heating and cooling that is being provided by traditional biomass, and all of the issues that come with that, through whether that's higher costs that people are paying or the health issues from kind of asthma and related health issues from those. So I'd like to open this to anyone to start with. Really, how would you get people to stop using wood for heating? And similarly, in a similar kind of vein, if you have people who don't have a connection to the electricity grid, how can you use renewable technologies or microgrids to help them? So who wants to come in on that one first?
Jack, I'm happy to respond after Emmanuel, I think it was.
No, well, okay, thank you. Yeah, we move together. No, yes, the access context was actually one of the part of our joint publication with the IEA, and indeed, most of the uses of traditional biomass actually happens in the developing world, in particular for cooking. Now, if they are not connected to the grid, a quick answer is the use of renewable energy power technologies that are can create can make a household a self-consumer. Of course, this will mean additional cost and additional investments that should arrive from governments that are willing to spend for the benefit of their own populations, using possibly also international funds and so on. This would also mean that regions without access to electricity could start having, for example, the refrigerations that is capital for the living of people, both for food and vaccine, as we have learned recently, conservation. Other solutions include also, let's continue using biomass, but instead of using it with open stoves, open firewood, and so on and so forth, provide a better technology that provides the same service with less biomass and less fumes. Let's remember that these technologies is the fourth cause of women death in Southeast Asia. So it's, just to make an example, it's a really imperative there is a moral imperative to change this kind of technologies. So now back to Patrick.
Thanks, Emmanuel. I just wanted to mention just a recent IEA project that I was involved in with the Energy and Resources Institute in India. And we were looking at the textile sector. And of course, one of the big challenges in providing steam and hot water in textiles is that there are many small and medium enterprises. They can be, really quite small, and natural gas may be available, but it can be quite expensive. So they do rely on traditional biomass in many instances. And so the team started to explore a little bit about whether there was a different way to deliver the hot water and steam by using some sort of central plant, which created an opportunity that it meant the SMEs didn't have to be spending a lot of capital, but they could actually pay for the steam and hot water that they received. So it was an alternative business model, but it did highlight, I think, at least around industry and SMEs, the importance of collaboration and looking at cluster-based solutions rather than looking at businesses one by one.
Thank you, Emanuele and Patrick. And I'd just like to stick on that theme of business models, please. So we've obviously there is a barrier for consumers if they need to buy a new appliance or retrofit their homes, for example, where they may not be able to afford, for example, to pay the cost of those upfront. So where we're seeing new business models that can help to overcome these issues. Can we, maybe Emma, if I could come to you, do we have any good examples of where business models are being scaled up to meet this challenge? Please.
Yeah, sure. And I'd stress two things. I think there's innovation on business models for sure. And what we're looking at is more and more governments amalgamating policies to become a bit more of a one-stop shop. So you don't have to, apply for a grant for your heating technology and apply for a separate grant for installation. And, you get kind of bogged down by paperwork. So in part, just being able to access at one place, get the information about it, will be, helpful. So Germany and France, for instance, have done this amalgamation this year, and we're kind of seeing that more and more. I think we've seen companies experiment with this, but it's still very small scale. So leasing models in the US, for instance, for ground source heat pumps are happening in New York, and they're really trying to prove this to be able to scale up. But I think one part of it that needs to be addressed is consumer information. So you say this, right? Consumers might not have the finances, but they also are probably making this decision under duress. So, their gas boiler's broken or their, oil heater's broken. It's probably in winter and they want to fix that as soon as possible. And if you've never heard of a low carbon heating technology, or you've never heard that it could be possible, that barrier exists where you're just going to ring up your local installer, the person you had last time, they're going to do the same thing and you're going to know the product you're getting. And I think, Patrick, you might be interested, have interesting thoughts about this, but for industry as well, we've seen kind of a big barrier where part of the adoption barrier is just the lack of knowledge and the risk adversity of taking that risk with a new technology your neighbors don't have, or you've never heard about before.
That's great. Thanks very much, Emma. Maybe I could come to Jan, and then Patrick, if you have any thoughts about that kind of information deficit barrier that in industry in particular after Jan, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. Of course, we already see a lot of business models for fossil fuel-based heating systems. You can, for example, take out finance in a similar way. You can take out finance to, to fund a new car for a fossil heating system already. And there's no reason why the same financial models, same business models shouldn't be also applied to clean heating. The main obstacle here, and Emma pointed to this, is that the running costs are often still too high. So if your running costs are higher, even if you take out finance, then your running costs will be even higher, and that is not attractive. If your running costs were lower for clean heating, then you could use the delta between the running cost of a fossil fuel heating system and the clean heating system to finance the upfront costs over time of a clean heating system. And there's no reason why that should be any different to the financing and business models currently offered for fossil heating. So that will be, I think, the main point to add here, that we need to get the operational costs right down so they can compete ideally lowly than the cost of running fossil fuel heating system, which indeed is the case in some of the Scandinavian countries I pointed to, where you have a very high carbon tax, and installing a heating oil boiler simply can't compete with the heat pump anymore, which is why nobody installs them, in addition to having regulatory bans, of course, that kick in at some point.
That's great. Thank you, Jan. A great shout out for the pay-as-you-save model, definitely. Great. Patrick, could we come on to you then to talk a little bit about any thoughts on how industries can help overcome that information barrier that Emma brought up? You're on mute.
Thanks very much, Jack, and thanks, Emma. I think the first thing to do is to really unpack what we mean by information. And when we're thinking about industry, but perhaps it's the same with a consumer to some extent, and Emma referred to the sort of the confidence, the safety in going with direct replacement of something that you already had. So when we think about managers in industrial organizations making decisions about things that are going to affect their process, their core focus in their business, then of course there's a degree of risk averseness. And many, at least in an Australian context, but also in the Indian context, get lots of knocks on the door, new products, here's the latest thing. So it can be quite difficult for them to discern which new products are appropriate and whether it's worth them taking the risk. I think from a policy perspective, governments can play a really important role in bringing key people with industry together. And we see it in the networks that have been developed in Germany, in Ireland, and certainly in Australia as well, and other countries. And that's about bringing together key people from the businesses to talk to each other. And that provides an opportunity for them to share their experiences about what has worked and what hasn't, because that sort of peer-to-peer communication can really build the confidence and give them the confidence to go forward with something that's a little bit new or out of the ordinary. Whereas if it's just providing them with information, a little bit in the way that perhaps a salesman might do, it's really not, often it's not going to give them the confidence to step forward. So we need to think about managers making decisions, people making decisions that they may see as potentially risky, and information can help. But even better is when that information comes from a trusted source that gives them confidence to move forward and try something new.
That's some great insights there. Thank you very much, Patrick. Do keep putting your questions in and comments into the chat, please. It'd be great to have to keep getting questions. I'd like to maybe go to Emanuele and ask a question specifically about big pieces of infrastructure that often come along with this challenge. So things like district heating, for example, which often need very large investments. What kind of policy measures can maybe governments or investors in emerging markets put in place to overcome those large barriers?
Well, yeah. Thank you for the question. District heating is a peculiar technology in this heating and cooling toolkit of solutions we have, because it's basically creating a monopoly. It's basically creating, locking in consumers with solutions. There may be also rules to avoid this monopoly and let people choose if to go to use the district heating or use their own assets. But in any case, it creates a sort of monopoly for our technology, for our infrastructure in one area, in one city, etc. So again, as I mentioned before, the more important policies will be at the beginning, in planning, in identifying the areas where this district heating is most needed. or cooling too, in making transparent rules to allow investors to bid for this kind of technology, to bid for to operate the district heating system, and transparent rules for the consumers to know how their heating is priced, how they can avoid paying too much, and if possible, also how they can detach from the system while keeping their house warm. So not to have their, okay, tomorrow you will switch off and then you are free to freeze in this winter. There are actually some example of bad district heating systems because they were basically mismanaged. And it's important that policymakers will keep an eye on the district heating regulations, update them, and when possible, nowadays, making them ready for the renewable energy. With renewable energy, we can have district heating with a little lower temperature than what we were used. Sometimes this is called the 5th generation of district heating. And this requires new investments in the old district heating systems. For example, let's look at Southeast Europe, where there are a lot of old district heating systems that can be revamped and using, instead of coal, renewable energy. In Hungary, they have a lot of good examples that are growing and where I would look at this moment.
Thanks very much, Emanuele. I'd like to talk a little bit about the fact, the kind of nature of heating and cooling as a fundamentally local issue. So, you know, we've gone from the kind of big elements of big investments that are needed of district heating, for example, right down to the more local levels, which district heating fundamentally is. But when you consider big pieces of infrastructure like that, I think many of the levers that you need to pull to be able to deliver those, aside from just the investment, sit outside of national governments. So, you know, whether that's some kind of planning or zoning authority. So has this presented any kind of particular challenges around how governments communicate across stakeholder groups, whether that's kind of local government or consumers themselves, and what lessons can be learned from that? Maybe if I could come to Jan first on that, please.
Sure. I mean, a good case study for this would be the Netherlands, actually, I think, because they have followed an approach which is pretty unique in that regard. So the Netherlands, because of the earthquakes, I'm sure many of you will have heard about the earthquakes in the Netherlands due to the extraction of fossil gas, have decided to completely phase out fossil gas for heating. And what they've done is, rather than have central government determine exactly what the pathway for phase out looks like, they have required each municipality, each local authority to come up with a plan, to consult with the stakeholders, with the citizens, and to come up with a plan and then propose that plan to central government. So that's an interesting model. It's still ongoing. My understanding is that that is not concluded yet. It's still in the process of being finalized, but it certainly is an interesting model that takes into account the kind of local particularities of all of this and should be looked at. I mean, another option that we have advocated for in the past is that governments could consider establishing some form of a coordinating body, that involves different stakeholders at different levels, but essentially oversees the transition and makes sure that all the different stakeholders are engaged in that and are involved. So it's not just central government determining and rolling it out, but it's a kind of more engaged process where everybody has a voice and where these issues are being taken seriously into consideration.
Thanks very much, Jan. So we've got 3 or so minutes left, and I just wanted to finish off, I think, with a similar kind of question that Federico asked to Brian earlier. So it's a fairly simple question, really. You can answer yes or no if you like. In fact, no, you can't answer yes or no, because I'm going to give you 3 options. But I'd just like to ask you what you think the key driver of heat and cooling decarbonisation is going to be, and is that policy, market, or consumer? And obviously, if you want to kind of expand on your answer a little bit, then you feel free to as well. So I'm going to start with you, Emma, if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure. I think I often pitch quick fire questions and then I don't answer them myself, but I would say policy, at least in the near term.
Great, thank you. And Emanuele, could we come to you next?
Thank you. And to conclude, yes, I agree with Emma. Policies are the main driver. How we heat, how we share ourselves, it's sometimes a cultural phenomenon, but it's mostly the result of politics, of policies. And the same will be for the next 30 years.
That's 2 for policy so far. Patrick, any other thoughts?
I just wanted to highlight that within the industrial sector, I think there's been an enormous sort of drive through net zero pledges that are being made by large organisations. And also the fact that as businesses start to look at their scope 3 emissions and therefore start looking and driving their customers and suppliers to change as well. So absolutely, I can't go beyond policy, of course, but I think the market, particularly in the last 12 months, investor interest, etc., is really playing a big role.
Thanks. And then, Jan, any last thoughts?
Well, working for the Regulatory Assistance Project, you would expect me to say that it's policy and regulation, and that is exactly what I say. I fully agree with Emma here, and I think it also goes back to one of Brian's points earlier in the introductory presentation, that a lot of the really positive changes we've seen was driven by policy. And of course, in the Net Zero 2050 report, the IEA have made the phase out of fossil heating through regulation a central pillar that got a lot of media attention. So I think definitely policy.
Great, thank you. So we have a resounding success for policy then, and let's hope that we can carry that forward into the future as we seek to decarbonize the heating and cooling sector. I'd like to thank all of my panelists today. We've had some really interesting insights. We've talked about everything from new business models through to investment and policy frameworks, and really, so I'm through to energy access, people and digital technology. So it's been really great to speak to you all today. And with that, I'd like to close the first panel and hand back to Federico. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Jack, and thanks, of course, also to all the panelists for sharing with the audience their views and insight on sustainable heating and cooling. It's been a very engaging panel, so thanks a lot to everybody once again. So now it's 1 hour and a half we are running the show, so we will take a short break to refill our cups and also to allow our technician to set the cameras for the second part of the conference, which will be in Spanish. But of course, the simultaneous translation service into English will be provided. So I will see you back here in 5 minutes sharp. Bienvenidos todos de vuelta a la conferencia internacional.
Welcome back to this sustainable heating and cooling, a key issue in tackling global warming. Now we'll be analyzing some public policies from the Energy Ministry of Chile that they have been implementing to boost sectors on sustainable cooling and heating. I would like to introduce Prudencio Gabriel, Chief of Sustainable Energies from the Energy Ministry. Thank you very much, Federico. And thank you to the International Energy Agency and everyone who made this event possible. And thank you to our very distinguished panelists who have been presented on this such a relevant topic, and of course to all our audience. So during the next minutes, I will be glad to give you a background on how sustainable cooling and heating are at our hands so that we can continue with our panel afterwards. I wanted to start with this image. Maybe many of you know Coyhai City in Chile. It has a spectacular view, and this was just a few months later because of biomass pollution, traditional biomass, which affects a lot of our cities in the center and south of the country. Of course, this gets us a lot of trouble on air pollution. We know that over 9.7 million people are exposed to high pollution levels, and that leads to premature deaths. And of course, that gives us social costs of over $2.4 million. Some other environmental issues that affect Chile and the world are climate change. We can see that this is more and more frequent in our valleys, where the land cannot get crops anymore. We cannot use them for agricultural purposes anymore. The biodiversity is getting affected also, and we are getting many other affectations. We are getting even with the mitigation work that we are doing, we are having a lot of trouble. Between 7 and 10% of our land for agriculture are disappearing, and we are having mega droughts risks, and half of our species are threatened as well. All this information is coming from the UN. Regarding climate change, Chile already committed to having net zero by 2050. And it's not only a commitment, but we already established a working plan on 4 main pillars based on retiring our coal-centered centrals and increasing the use of renewables. And it's also based on the energy efficiency and energy management, because we know that this is going to tackle GHG emissions. And among these, sustainable cooling and heating are key elements. So maybe it's important to mention what we understand for cooling and heating. It's important to see where we are using it in our households with water, when we're cooking, on refrigeration, also on AV, for our households, industry, hospitals, and also in many industrial operations, because many of the industry processes involve cooling and heating. And here, who is using cooling and heating? And here is where policymakers and policies are involved, because these are three different sectors that are the main consumers: household, commercial and public, and industrial, or the industry, which is the third main sector. Now, how is our energy consumption? This estimation comes from our last survey, and more than 1/3 of our consumption comes from cooling and heating. And the rest goes to transportation and electric uses that don't come for cooling and heating. But this 36% is represented by cooling and heating. And more than 3/4 of these parts come from diesel, gas, and non-sustainable resources. So we need to replace them for renewable energies and many other resources. And if we compare this to a global framework, then we can see that 50% of the energy consumption is due to cooling and heating, and 90% comes from non-renewables. So maybe we are not in such a bad place, but still there's a lot to do. So now, if we take every segment, we see that the household is the main consumer. Then we have the commercial part. And here in the household, we have, it's the commercial and the sanitary or health use comes from gas and coal, excluding non-traditional biomass. And on a household, only 5.3 could be considered sustainable, and all the others come from gas and biomass that comes from wood. And in gas, we are including gas and liquefied gas. And on the industry, we have more modern biomass that's used from cellulose, but we still see a lot of use from coal, biodiesel, and traditional biomass. We have identified some opportunities of implementing more sustainable energies. We see that there's a lot of thermal solar energy that can be used for different household processes and even for heating, and also some solar energy for the industry, because those are equipment that could last for over 20 years, that have been proven all over the world and are very easily adaptable. We could also talk about boiler and co-generation between biomass and biogas on household and also the industry, and also efficient cooling. using heating pumps and the best inverters that could help us to make a more efficient use of electricity and energy, so that we could get a better cooling and heating in the commercial sector. As they previously said in the previous panel, we could also implement the green hydrogen, using it either directly or with synthetic fuels to help us with high temperature processes. And we know that in the medium and long term, it could be extremely helpful. We also have some not so high temperatures where we can implement heat pumps, and that could be key. We also go towards electrification. That means that we could distribute water through different networks, such as using gas networks, but for water, and it could have heat distributors so that water could be heated and distributed in the households, and the heat pumps could be used as sources, renewable sources. And to strengthen all our growth and to be more sustainable, we have developed our cooling and heating strategy through a participative process, through different surveys, a public consultation in July and August, where more than 2,000 people got involved from the civil society, public sector, suppliers, and so on. And it was held around Chile so that we could really do a comprehensive work. You can visit our website to see the full strategy and some aspects of how to be implemented. Regarding some details on the strategy, the goal is that all people could meet their needs in an informed and efficient way through different trustable, flexible, and sustainable sources, through a competitive, modern, and transparent market, environmentally friendly. And we also have some more specific goals to have strategic access with specific actions and specific goals to have a pathway for the long term. We have 4 main axes: one for energy transition with sustainability, where we want to strengthen our markets through more dynamic goods and services, and also to make cooling and heating more compatible to our environment, and to also be linked with thermal equity and energy poverty. Because we need to keep working on that, especially in countries such as Chile, where we are far away from comfortable aspects, and that we need to keep working on such things in energy. We also need to strengthen our institutions and our regulations, not only on the public aspect, but also on the private sector, and to strengthen all our regulations to really develop different technologies to go towards different markets.
The third and fourth pillars have to do with training, that are linked with training of those that provide the solutions of these thermal technologies and of heat and cold technologies. We're going to be working on the development of a specific knowledge and all the aspects of the sector that need to strengthen the industry through these new solutions. Finally, we have everything related to information and education that is available for everybody that allows the decision makers, whether it's people at home, some more industrial customers as well, to have all the information available in order to make good decisions. So these are some examples that are being already implemented related to this conditioning platform that we are launching, that people are going to identify the different alternatives, the different options. There will be cost estimates as well of each alternative. And also we would be linking this with the sustainable energy agencies also, and with stakeholders that we have worked with to enable this type of solutions. So regarding the previous topics, in terms of training, we have already worked on and the labor regulation, also the most urgent and pressing matters. Those are part of the topics we are addressing. So just to wrap up, I would like to share our vision and where do we see ourselves in the future. We see that only 24% comes from sustainable resources. We want to have 45% of resources that should be renewable by 2030. That is the initial and the upfront challenge, and hopefully this will be even more. Some additional challenges and additional goals we have is the reduction of greenhouse gas effects by 2030, 40%, and also the percentage of population that is meeting their heat and cold needs. The initial goal would be 75% by 2050, but basically we don't really have a baseline yet to know how many people are not covering those heat and cold needs yet. So we're working on that. We're working on the baseline. That is the first mission. And based on that, we will be making progress in that sense. Then just to wrap up, the benefits of sustainable heat and cold is that there are social benefits, has to do with the improvement of health, well-being, new jobs, economic benefits will include important savings and productivity in the productive sectors, and also environmentally speaking, it's about decreasing the greenhouse gas emission and the dependency of fossil fuels. And sustainable sources should be a fundamental pillar to accomplish sustainable development and to improve the quality of life of everybody. So hopefully we will keep that image and that picture throughout the whole year in Chile. Thank you so much. Hopefully, we keep that image. I do remember that image very well. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was very interesting what you shared with the audience. And also, as I understand, you will be part of panel 2, right? Can you confirm? Yes, I am honored to be with these amazing panelists as well. So eventually questions that the audience will pose is something that you will be able to address as well. Actually, the second panel is about to start. It's about the regional perspective of heat and sustainable heating and cooling. It goes from public policies to the private sector vision, going through the banking role and policies as well. So we will be able to listen to 4 excellent presentations, brief presentations, and then we're going to have a Q&A session. We will have experts on the subject, and we will have the moderator, who is Erwin Plett, has wide experience in different countries and continents, and he has been assigned as the hydrogen ambassador by the Ministry of Energy in Chile. And he's also a director of H2 Chile, CEO Low Carbon Chile, has a PhD in process engineering of University in Germany, and a PhD in geothermal energy by Wisconsin University. Erwin, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us today. I will give you the floor so you can introduce the panel and the panelists. Thank you so much for the introduction. I personally want to thank the Ministry, Juan Carlos Jovet, and the Executive Director of the IEA for the invitation that was made to me to be an active partner in this panel. So I think this is very, very important. not just because of the percentage of energy of what it means to the world. It also affects people, and that is the social side of this that I believe is essential. The dynamic today of this panel, it's going to be, well, we're going to have 4 panelists from the regional Latin American perspective, and these presentations will last between 5 to 7 minutes. Hopefully they will make it in 5 minutes. And the idea is then to open a Q&A session and a discussion session, and also to interact with the audience. So hopefully we'll be able to respond all your questions. Please send your questions through the chat box. And first of all, I would like to introduce you and to welcome the panelists who are here with us in the second panel. We already heard we already went through the first one. So the first one would be delivering investment in sustainable heat and cooling solutions by Jose Antonio Urteaga, Senior Energy Specialist at the Inter-American Development Bank. Are you there, Jose? Great. Greetings, welcome from northern. I know you are northern, in the northern side of the continent. Thank you so much, Jose Antonio, for joining us. Then we have the second presentation, which is the renewable thermal projects in mining. That is going to be made by Ian Nelson. Ian Nelson, are you there? He's the CEO at Inch Consulting. Are you there, Ian? I did see him. And then we have third presentation, development of energy efficient sustainable heating projects in Chile. And I am glad to greet Paula Frigerio, who is the Chief Innovation Development Officer at Abastible SA. Hello, Paula. And finally, last but not least, we have development of energy efficient sustainable heating projects by Daniel Gonzalez, who is the Chief Executive Officer at AUCA Gusaul Latam. Hello, Daniel. Actually, we will also have another panelist who is Gabriel Prudencio, who just made a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for joining us. So let me go to the first panelist. Let me introduce you to our first guest from Mexico, Jose Antonio Urteaga. He's an economist from UNAM. He has a specialization in econometrics and 25 years of professional experience in management and planning of energy efficiency, renewable sources, and climate change. Currently, he's the senior energy specialist at the Inter-American Development Bank, but previously he held the position of the Trust Fund Director for Electric Energy Savings in the private sector of Mexico, Operations Director of NGM Innova in Mexico, Central America, Director of Climate Change Projects in Semarnat, which is the environmental ministry in Mexico. Jose Antonio will open a panel talking about the investment of sustainable solutions in heating and cooling. Let's see if we can do it in 5 minutes. Thank you, Jose Antonio. We look forward to your presentation. Go ahead. Thank you so much, Erwin. Thank you to the Chilean Ministry of Energy and the IEA because of this wonderful opportunity to participate in this important seminar. Well, first of all, I would like to say, and I do want to focus on cooling. I would say, what is the importance of cooling for sustainable, social, sustainable development, economically, environmentally speaking? It is the consumption of cooling, almost 22% of electric energy, 40% is dedicated by cooling and air conditioning, 21% conditioning. And it's between 40 and 30%, and that is the great potential. What are the benefits or the basic elements? First, safety, environmental sustainability, and then economic development, economic growth of people. And what are the dimensions of all of this? The investment infrastructure, that is one of the main barriers, was already mentioned before, which is the basis for these devices, human capital, infrastructure, and governance is very important. And just to get into the subject, one first estimate, how important is it for energy efficiency of the fridge replacement? This is only one estimate, it's not a baseline based on a specific surveys, but it's very, very interesting as an estimate to see what is the level of fridges in Chile, how many households have electricity, how many of them have fridges. And we see a potential of fridge replacement of almost 930,000 fridges that because of their consumption conditions, they have a certain condition because of the year they were manufactured. And what would be the investment that we could make here? More than $300 million, only considering the price of new equipment, new efficient equipment, and without considering the operation costs of any of these programs. Can we do it? Of course we can do this because we have a good example. Here in Mexico, we were able to replace, we had two programs for this, almost 2.5 million fridges, almost 230,000 air conditioning pieces of equipment through a financial model with discount, with credit letters, also with liquid warranties that allow us to reduce the operation cost, the collection risk, the collection through digital invoices. It was a mechanism that would replace the fridge very efficiently, and with the engagement and participation of the electric companies, the development bank, the manufacturers, distributors of equipment, we have to have participation models with all the stakeholders involved, so everybody has a business opportunity. New programs in the case of Mexico City, where there is the participation of a private fund, and we're going to start a pilot project. Here is described as a summary, and then that is going to be with the BID, with the IDB, and with the program of the government to replace thousands of fridges. Then we have another interesting example, for example, Paraguay. And there is the NAMA Paraguay, the program, even though they have very clean electric grid. Here, we're talking about the management of the refrigerants. It's not just about the impact and mitigation of climate change. It's about the coolants. It's also about reducing the impact on the ozone layer. Another case, Celsia Colombia, another private company, among their action plan, they have a store where they finance these efficiency equipment, efficiency devices. As a user of this company, you can select the most efficient pieces of equipment. We're working with them currently to replace non-efficient equipment. So my conclusion and my final thoughts is that there are great opportunities of doing business, of different mechanisms to face this, and we are here for any questions and comments. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jose Antonio, for this wonderful presentation. And I really love the saying here, or the logo, improving the lives of people, because this is part of feeling better. And just to add up the difference between renewable energies and energy savings, I know that our photovoltaic panel suppliers, what they do is that they basically, well, they go ahead, they buy a new fridge. It's because actually the fridges are the biggest electric generators at home, way more than using, is way better, much more efficient to replace them than to place solar panels. So now I would like to introduce Ian Nelson, mechanical industrial engineer from Catholic University with an MBA from the Political Science Institution of Paris. He has more than 25 years of experience related to the energy industry and consulting services. He's currently the general manager, founder, and executive director of Inch Consulting, and co-founder and member of the executive board of Nanotechnology Lab, INTEC. Previously, he founded and he was the general manager of Jaima Energy, and he will show us an example there. And manager of big gas customers and engineer range. And Ian Nelson will speak about the development of thermal projects, renewable projects, and with a focus on mining. Go ahead, Ian, sorry, go ahead. Thank you so much, Irving. First of all, I would like to thank for the invitation to this seminar. We don't have much time. I know I'm gonna have to go straight to the point. Can you see the presentation? Yes. Yes, as a matter of fact, 2 months ago, we sold Energía Jaima, our previous company that is dedicated to renewable energies, and it was sold to a Canadian joint venture. And we're confident that, we have been doing these consulting services. I've been working with with my partners and throughout different sectors. Here we have we have biogas, boilers, thermal sciences. We have solar accumulation here and many other things I have worked on. Here you can see kind of a summary of my experience. And also I've been in many places in the world, because this is important, because the realities are different everywhere. And you can find things that are also very similar between the different countries, way more than what we would have thought initially. We have operated for many years. We have been doing maintenance. We have been doing financing. Here in my presentation, it says, we have our Danish Hans Griedehold is my Danish partner. So many of the things and ideas that I will be presenting here have been made together and in partnership and basically designed by him. So I'm very glad to show you this solar panel background that I'm seeing. The district heating, well, this presentation is not basically focused on district heating, but this is just one example of what we have been doing with solar and thermal energy. This is Marstal, a Danish island. It has everything, basically. It's very interesting because it is 54 degrees north. And at that latitude, we can see that 45% is used, we use 55% of solar power. And we can see the integration of different types of technologies. In this case, in Marstal, and given the accumulation of solar power, not just through the panels, but there is also a biomass boiler, there is a heat pump, there is an ORC unit for waste heat. And basically, we have 99% energy supply that is sustainable. So it's very, very interesting. What I wanted to show you here in detail, the case of this a mining example, but I wanted to explain to you first the challenges we encountered when we started this project at the north of the country. The obstacles in mining and the weather conditions are very extreme. There is a lot of dust, heat, cold, wind. It's difficult to move. It's desert conditions. So we had to have a very robust solution. So this could work 24 hours per day. And this is critical for mining. Here you can see the way it works in Pampa Elvira Solar, it's called. Well, we see these, here is 43,000 panels, almost 44,000 panels that work in parallel with a solar accumulator of 4,300 cubic meters of water. And this one is connected to the existing equipment, the way it was designed. And what it does is that it hits the electrolytes for the electro refining process. Here you can see some pictures on the right side of the of where the machines are held and where we have the boiler. It's almost 100 meters distance. There is no loss in the transportation of energy. We can see a picture of the plant and an air view. And when you go over the area, you can see the whole design and the whole facility. We need to maintain hydraulic losses. So it was quite a challenge to accomplish this, but it had very important outcomes. And the business model is that this is a 10-year contract. We have different options to sell and to buy on both sides. We also have service in which the company has certain power, and what we do is that we have to maintain the temperature at a certain range of the electrolyte temperature. And it's very interesting because since the operations started, we have seen minor deviations in the levels. Before that, there were major fluctuations, but this is something that we were able to improve and to have operational improvement as well. And also, there was design in construction, operation, maintenance involved of the heat supplier. And at that time, I was in charge of the project, and this worked really, really well.
Here you can see some of the data. On the right, we have the accumulator, which is around 52,000 megawatts a year. And of course, we get many benefits. As we already mentioned, the cathodes are better, we are consuming less energy, and we reduced our local emissions. And we've had many different positive effects. I also wanted to show this because it's been acknowledged and awarded. And I wanted to highlight something because Gabriela Mistral was able to register the copper cathodes as a good delivery, which means that we can also sell them at a higher price. And of course, when they were asked what they feel about that, they said they're thrilled because that's also better for their clients. We also had some other projects on the mining side. We had the Milpillas project in Mexico and the Centinela project in Chile, which are smaller projects. And the Centinela project was kind of interesting because here the mine bid and bought a solar panel system, and we thought that it was not the most adequate for them. We have the air picture here, and we can see the surface that they were covering. So we think that just to give a few differences between these two examples, for Elvira Solar, they really needed energy supply using solar power. And the provider was responsible for everything. So they were really compliant because if not, they were not going to be paid. But in the case of Centinela was not the case. So the results were not optimal because they were not in charge of everything. And the thermal equipment was not working as good as it should have been. So some of the improvements was low carbon emissions, better technical equipment, and so on. But I think that we need to have competitive prices, and we, of course, need to take all the environmental aspects, and I hope that we can take it more in the country. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ian, for such an interesting presentation and for such impressive pictures. It's really nice to see it, but of course, it's not an easy task. I would like now to introduce our third speaker, Paula Frigario, who is industrial engineering from the Chile University. She has an MBA and over 30 years of experience on project management. Now she is the innovation manager, and she was previously the management developer project, and she led the Mackenzie projects. And she is also president on WIN LPG, Women LPG, which means Women in Liquefied Gas Projects. And she is the director and the World Manager Council in Chile. She will be talking about development of energy efficient sustainable heating projects in Chile. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much. I want to thank the Ministry of Energy and the International Energy Agency for inviting me to this panel. Let me share my screen. I am now sharing my screen. Great. So I'll be speaking of development of energy efficient sustainable heating projects in Chile, and I'll be sharing about experience we have. But why are we speaking of liquefied gas if it's considered as a fossil fuel? Well, because it's also considered as the best transition fuel, because it also has a very low cost, and it's a great solution. As I was saying, it's a great solution, especially for industrial and household solutions. It has 20% less emissions than kerosene and 50% less than coal. And it has 150 less monoxide emissions than coal. So that's why it is used for the great transition to clean energies. Now, regarding transportation and storage, liquefied gas is sold in many different formats, and it can be driven to different places. It doesn't depend on pipes, so it's very safe, and it can be stored safely as well. Now, I want to share what we have done on energy efficiency. In the last few years, we've given advice to our partners, giving them different solutions to improve the environment. But we also are focused on innovation, looking at the market, bringing knowledge and high technologies. We also work on financing, and we work with the ESCO model, and that helps our clients to change towards renewables because we fund investments And then we get the return of our investments through the different energies. And sometimes we even get it through shared investments. I'm going quickly because I don't want to take much time, but we've also worked through mixed solutions so that we can get ideal solutions to our clients, working with cogeneration, heat pumps, photovoltaic panels, control and monitoring systems, and we are also supplying energy to other clients. And now, talking on specific projects, I'm going to be presenting some of the industrial projects on high consume that we've been working on, and a project on green hydrogen for the future. So the first one is on Pico Cavity, and we've had very impressive results. This had an efficient boiler working with liquefied gas with a modulating burner. And this allowed us to have a stable temperature and to have a better view. CO2 emissions were reduced on 71%. Particular material emissions were reduced on 99%. And they use energy efficiency was improved on 92%. We also have the project from the Touristic Services National Chamber, where we used heat pumps for AV, and here solar panels and photovoltaic panels were used, which led us to reduce our CO2 emissions in 17%, and our costs were reduced in 60%, and the electricity generated by photovoltaic panels was 20%. The last project is Patagonia Fresh, using a interchange boiler with fuel oil and liquefied gas. Our CO2 emissions were reduced in 19%, and we saved 18% of energy. And now the project on green hydrogen and liquefied gas. We are very interested in working on this for the future, and we are already working on future and pilot projects. I will start with a pilot project, which we are using with gas and hydrogen. Our research shows that this will be the first appliance, a mixed appliance. That's why we started with this pilot program. Our pilot started with the blending of hydrogen and gas, and we are performing this with the UAC, and we are making this blending of H2 gas and hydrogen and gas. And here we have the pilot when we want to escalate the project. This is one of the projects that was chosen out of 10. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Paula. And thank you for informing us about all the work you're doing on green hydrogen. And it's also great to see what you're doing to go towards net zero for 2030, because I think you're doing a great job. And it's going to help a lot. Thank you very much, Paula. And now, let me introduce our fourth speaker, who is Daniel Gonzalez, engineer and mechanical engineer from Catalunya University with over 20 years of expertise on energy and energy efficiency and renewable energies, focusing on thermal and solar powers for cooling and heating. He currently holds the board of A1C and Consenso Renewable. He was also part of the solar energy panel, and he's been part of the heating and cooling of the International Energy Agency. He will be speaking of the development of energy efficiency policies in the south of Chile. Thank you very much, Erwin. Thank you to the ministry and to the agency for inviting me to speak on this panel. So I'll go straight to the point. But if you want to know more about me or IWASOL, you can go to our website. So, as Daniel said, in the south of Chile, we have a lot of problems regarding pollution. So that's why we are also addressing the electric matrix. We've been speaking a lot of electrifying the energy demand, and 20% of our demand, not taking transportation into account, is very small, which means that we have a huge challenge there to really be able to tackle the demand we have, and we need to make it through renewables. Nowadays, it's made through fossil fuels, but now we are moving towards a renewable matrix, which makes us have huge problems on energy management. We also have very important topics on cooling and heating. We have a very important demands on power, and we need our network to be flexible as well. We know that Chile has many different projects on aeolic power, wind power, sun power, and so on. But the thing is that nowadays we're still using many traditional biomass to generate it or co-generate it, and it can't really be used for district heating because it's too far from cities. So that's why we're now talking about a systemic flexibility, because we need to see the challenges we have, the offer we have, and the demand. So we need flexible tools. We need to be flexible on transmission, distribution, generation, storage, and management. So I would ask you if you can foresee a system that manages energy and also things of the storage, distribution, and generation, because that's the whole candy we could see to have a comprehensive system for renewable energies. Well, that already exists, and it's a district heating with accumulation. When we have district heating system, we have the systems that we've worked with the UN and with the Energy Agency. And there we have the demand where we have been using heat pumps in the electric grid, and we can use it as a whole demand, and we can centralize our demand so that we can manage it better. But we all still have a demand peak. But what would happen if we use a generator for it? Well, as you know, thermal power uses a lot of energy. So it's nonsense to use hydrogen generators or any other generators if what we want to accumulate is heat. So what we want is to use a huge accumulator that can bring everything we need and then manage all the demands and then manage it in the proper way so that we can heat our different sources with biomass, with pumps, and so on. And even gas, that they were saying it's a great transition fuel. And we can use our heat pumps using the grid and giving more opportunities to the grid. So we can use our residual energy from sun power. We can buy some power. I mean, the main point is to be flexible. That's the thing, because up to now, we just have 25% of what we need.
Here we can put together all renewables in an integrated manner, and we can integrate cogeneration. We can cogenerate, produce heat at local level and electricity at local level to play with this manageability of demand and production as well. So this, it could be a dream, but it's actually very feasible and it's available to us. All the cities at the south of Chile, they are like a grid of energy efficiency. We just need to add demand and to do it properly. In the success case that I have shown you, we have been doing this work within the framework of the District Energy in Cities initiative. And we have demonstrated that this is a financially feasible system. For example, here in Temuco, we can see the development plan to connect more than 300,000 households of these 30 years and basically reduce all emissions and produce energy efficiency linked, of course, to biomass. And well, my apologies, I am running out of time. Now going into gas. The south of Chile has three important energy resources: hydroelectric, biomass, hydrogen. Well, a renewable source could be green hydrogen, leaving aside biomass. And this has economic consequences, social consequences, and it has an impact on the sustainable exploitation and the preservation of woods, etc. So here, green hydrogen within green gases, in the green gases category, we have hydrogen, leaving aside biomass use. And we see a great potential in the production of biomethane associated to biomass. Why? Why is this interesting? Because we cannot co-generate solid biomass within the cities. We shouldn't be doing it because it means moving many people, many trucks of biomass to get them into, enter them into the city. And it has certain implications. But wood can be gasified. You can use biomethane, can be introduced into the natural gas lines, and to introduce renewable energy, renewable electricity to all households and the cogeneration powerhouses, which is very, very important today if we consider taking into account all this planning together. So thank you. That will be all. Thank you for your time. Thank you so much for this. Well, thank you more for your vision. We are seeing 3 different Chiles. Actually, we're seeing a very important example of how our own Chile are 4,200 kilometers of desert, and what we're showing about the Muco that has a lot of biomass, so the solutions are not the same everywhere, and it is important to take into account diversity. So let's go to the panel. Let's go now to Gabriel, the last one of the panel. Thank you. This has been a great effort from Gabriel as well. So thank you, Gabriel, for being with us. He's the chief of division, head of sustainable energy division. I cannot introduce him anymore because he has already been properly introduced before. So one point I wanted to mention before posing any questions is that we always forget that it's a fluctuating demand of energy. Sometimes I only use water when I take a shower or when I wash my hands. Either way, and afterwards I don't use it. So it can be fluctuating, these demands. Maybe this week I'm going to use my car, and maybe the following week I won't. And when I'm going to leave my house, I will need a lot of power for my car. So it can be fluctuating. So that it happens with renewables as well. So it can be a complex system because it's a fluctuating demand and variable demand generation. And that is solved with storage. And that is something that was demonstrated. Water is so simple. Whenever we see water issues, all households have a water tank on top. They all have water tanks to accumulate water in order to cover demand peaks. Why don't we do that with power as well? Sometimes we do it with certain ponds, like oil ponds, gas ponds. That is the way we are storing energy or power, but we need to do something differently because with renewables, we need to store them after we generate them. So what Gabriel showed us, which was amazing, is that we have different applications to what we call cold and heat. Because we have an issue. Whenever we talk about power, everybody thinks about electricity. There is a confusion of terms here. That is why we're calling this conference heat and cold, because we're talking about the power we use for cooking food, heat and cold as processes, and then we have conditioning and air conditioning and heat conditioning, which is thermal comfort as well. So I do want to emphasize how important it is to people, because we're talking about thermal comfort of people and the power and energy of people. I remember a conversation I had with the chairman of ASHRAI, which they actually drop all these generation regulations. And we were talking about conditioning. And in Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, they were running some tests at schools by lowering air conditioning only 3 degrees Celsius in the summer. Then they ran the tests with the children, and it looks like there was an increase of the productivity of children by 15% just because they lowered 3 degrees Celsius the schools because of this thermal comfort. It gives us an idea of 50% increase of efficiency. Imagine what I can do in 5 years with that. It is about productivity as well. So this is very, very relevant because what we're doing for the comfort of people has to do with their productivity that goes beyond energy costs. So beyond, I also wanted to remember energy efficiency because we have a carbon neutral policy for 2050. 50% of the measure is the reduction of using wood, which is directly related to biomass. But we also need energy efficiency. We need to start on that side because it is very important to save energy so we have less investment. So this is what we should consider as well with energy efficiency. So first I would like to ask Gabriel, the government has already implemented heat and cold policies, but that is in order to regulate the market with the idea of reducing emission, right? Right? So secondly, Gabriel, what are the heat and cold projects that have the highest demand currently and which are going to be used in the long term because they need more investment? What type of projects are we gonna be seeing? Yes, thank you thank you Erwin for the question and for giving me the floor. Well, what you were mentioning is promoting heat and cold that are sustainable, reducing emissions. And I do want to emphasize it's not just because we are reducing emissions, it's also because it has economic and social benefits. That is the most comprehensive way of seeing sustainability and working towards the comfort of people. And also, what are the technologies that have the highest demand? I don't know if it's fair to say this, but it's like a crystal ball, basically guessing which one is going to have the highest demand. In the Ministry of Energy, we have this technological neutrality. We are technologically neutral. We just want to welcome all those technologies that contribute to sustainable development. So we know that biomass is contributing to the industrial processes now. So they were asking, why don't we have more solar projects? Well, that is an amazing, mining. Well, that is an excellent question. But I do see great potential in that sector as well. And in the building and household sector, I think in some parts they're going to be using a modern biomass or a traditional biomass. Perhaps traditional biomass. It could be, well, it's a sophisticated way to call wood biomass. It doesn't have many filters and there is combustion that leads to contamination a lot. So we need to have cogeneration with biomass that is way more efficient, has more filters, and to manage the humidity, the pollutant, the contamination aspects of this. So that is used at commercial level. And also other technologies are coming into the picture as well, like district heating. So I think they all have a place to be developed. And of course, we need to be aware of the potential of each technology, and to take advantage of them. Thank you so much, Gabriel, because we don't have much time left, but I would like to ask a question to Daniel. You mentioned heat pumps, right? In the case of Temuco. So the question would be, is this going to become a problem for the electrical aspect of this? If, for example, at the Temuco level, can we use renewable sources there? Please, we need a short answer because we're running out of time. Yeah, actually what I mentioned is that electrification of the thermal demand of Temuco is done directly. That is producing heat with heat pumps and with electric resistance on site on each household. And so this is, in the case of Coyhaique, it was an emergency solution. It was implemented. instead of resorting to electricity. So in that case, the electric demand is going to be a lot and the power as well. So it's basically a challenge. It's a big, big challenge that needs energy planning because you need to oversize and overdimension production. So we need to have centralized systems that can include different types of energy sources, not just electric sources and renewables. In both cases, we can use them, but we need to include them into the electric grid and to have flexibility of the system in a centralized manner with a flexible way. It is a flexible way to have renewables. Ian, would you like to add up to this answer? Yeah, actually, when you see what is happening in, for example, district heating it has been proven that you can, that, and the advantage that this district heating has is that you can accumulate heat in small lakes. You can also check it out. There is a case of 300,000 cubic meters of solar accumulation. And what it allows you is to accumulate heat during the summer to use it for in the winter time. So it stretches the demand. In Copenhagen, for example, they have a biomass plant. They use waste heat from households, which is a big problem we have today. But the good thing is that when you have a plus service, you can turn it into heat, and when you have waste, for example, you can use it for heat. And if a company has certain waste, you can also produce heat with that. So it allows you to work with these fluctuations. And if we go to a fully electric world, it becomes a challenge because still we don't have like the batteries or water pumping to be able to have this accumulation and to have a modulation. It makes it more difficult. Obviously, this means that we need district heating networks and district heating grid. But the good thing is that a district heating system has low level of investment, and it's a good alternative that is very cheap. And that's why I'm saying this, because you can always see the economic side of things, and it can be a capex investment, but it's a single investment. Yeah, thank you. And it is very important to differentiate the upfront costs from cheap costs. Yes. But also human capital is very important, right? So do you believe that the current industry has sufficient knowledge? Really, of course, you are subcontractors. So, or you have subcontractors. What is the knowledge level of engineers, technicians, etc.? Paula, what do you think? I think at technical level, the truth is that we have great local knowledge. Always, it is important to keep training and educating people on these topics. And regarding knowledge from the client standpoint, we see that they are more and more aware every day. Environmental concern is not just in Chile, it's everywhere in the world. We have new regulations launched for energy efficiency. And also when we see the results obtained, we see the positive results. We see that it gives us more awareness on the solutions that exist. In terms of technology, yes, there are some technologies that have a bigger scale or can be upscale and also require maintenance. So you need to have maintenance people, and you need to have good maintenance equipment as well. For heat pumps, would be ideal to have critical mass to make it easier to expand. Thank you, Paula, for your response. I would like to take this time to ask Jose Antonio, how does the IDB can actually help us doing this at great scale? And I think you actually said it in your presentation with local projects. How can we move these heat and cold projects? How can we do this in a local market? Great, thank you. I would like to emphasize the importance of energy efficiency. The energy that is not being used is the cheapest one. In the case of Santiago de Chile, the families of the first type of income already are saving a lot in power, in electric power. Actually, a high percentage of the population in Chile not yet has access to air conditioning services. How to do this? Well, what we can do is, together with the Chilean government and with the state ministries and state governments, is to implement programs that that facilitate the exchange or swapping equipment, this all equipment from families. And also the benefit is job is actually employment, because for every $500,000 of investment of this type of equipment, we are creating 15 new jobs. So we need to develop a financial system, a communication system. And as an example, in Mexico, the program was very successful among the people because the logo was changed, the old for the new one. And the image was a couple that was very old, and this woman couldn't sleep because he was snoring. Her husband was snoring, but no, she was thinking about how to have energy efficiency. But anyway, this is like merchandise, like marketing is also very important for these purposes. So I believe these type of programs can be very relevant.
Thank you very much, Jose Antonio. So, yeah, those were actually kind of the closure works to put energy efficiency in the first place and then technology. So for now, I think that it's just to thank the audience, my panelists, for being here, and also to thank the Ministry of Energy and the International Energy Agency for inviting me. And now I give the floor to Federico again. And I want to give a final message as well, and also to give an announcement. Because we have a program which is named Put Energy for Your SME, which is for co-generation of energy for SMEs. We had a similar one last year, but it was for general businesses, and now it's just for SMEs. And actually, it's part of the great work that we've been doing. And many of the work has been done on photovoltaics for energy generation, but we've also added some incentives for projects that had nothing to do with photovoltaics, because we really want to have more projects, different projects. So we want everyone to get involved in this project. You can visit our website and you can see everything about the project. Thank you very much, Gabriel, for the announcement, so that you can also see what we've seen. And the return of investment has been of 3 years, and the photovoltaics gives a return of investment of 9 years. So energy efficiency works a lot better. And now, Federico, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists, and also to Gabriel for the call to action for our SMEs. Thank you again to everyone, because you showed us how Latin America and Chile has a lot of potential to work to tackle all the challenges that we are facing in the social and environmental aspects. We are now approaching the end of this conference that has showed us, on the one hand, the good initiatives that we've had nationally and internationally, but that has also showed us that there's a lot to do, because worldwide, it's only 10% of the cooling and heating energy that comes from renewables. So I want to highlight that now, after 3 hours, we have a total audience of over 50,000 people. And we had a peak of 200,000 people connected during the whole time. We've had people from whole Latin America, Mexico, Argentina, Peru, the United States, and also French, Spain, Germany, and even such a non-favorable time difference, such countries as India and Pakistan. So that makes us realize how important and relevant this topic is. So just to wrap up, I want to thank the International Energy Agency for supporting us on the co-organization of this important event. And I want to mention Jack Miller from the agency, my colleagues from the ministry, and also to highlight the sponsorship from the GIZ and the energy partnership between Chile and Germany since 2019, and that has been very fruitful towards an energy transition. So now I want to thank all our attendees, and I want to invite our sub-ministry to give the closing words. How are you, Mr. Sub-Ministry? Thank you very much, Federico. I'm here in Santiago. I also want to greet Paula, Edwin, Daniel, and all of you who are with us today at this such interesting event. I also want to thank the participation of the International Energy Agency and the GIZ Cooperation. Thank you to all the panelists for their participation, and it is really aligned with what we've been working as a country and as a ministry, because we've been working in our carbon emissions reduction by 2050. But as we've been seeing today, we cannot do it just by reducing our energy consumption, especially if it represents 35% of our energy consumption by cooling and heating, coming from fossil fuels and biomass. And we need a huge effort for clean energies to go to all sectors. As we saw in the first panel, Brian Mulway told us that there are clear projects on cooling and heating, implementing new technologies. We saw examples from Sweden and Finland on district heating playing a huge role. To walk towards a sustainable cooling and heating, we need clear policies and professional training. So to really tackle our barriers, we need to have a clear pathway. We also need to look to go towards electrification and the use of green hydrogen. In the second panel, we got a summary on the national strategy, and we saw the use of different renewable energies in the different sectors, on how we are looking for training and also to create more awareness. And in Mexico, they changed 2.5 million fridges and air conditioners. and the suppliers, the banks, and many joint coordinated stakeholders were involved. We also saw the example from Codelco with their ESCO frame model and many different models from other companies with the use of liquefied gas and green hydrogen as a model. Also, to make a model on wood and how to work with different private and public stakeholders to move towards the materialization of our projects. And we also established the design of our strategy and how to use renewable thermal energies that are aiming to position thermal energies as the mitigators of our GHG emissions by using great technologies and renewables, and not only for production and households, but also to really meet people's needs in a sustainable way, in a trustable way, and in a comfortable way. We have very expensive goals. By 2050, 80% of our use for household and industry needs to be renewable. And for 2050, all our household needs to be over energy poverty. And we also need to reduce our GHG emissions in a 65% by 2050. So, as we've seen, we've showed that cooling and healing is a cross-sectional aspect. And our goals represent huge challenges that need to be tackled globally. So that's why the Ministry of Chile invites you to actively participate in all our initiatives. Again, jointly with the International Energy Agency, we greet you and we thank you for being connected here to have such a great conversation. And thank you for being interested on such a relevant topic for a sustainable future for our country and the world. Thank you.